Hi, I am Max Keiser. This is the Keiser Report, covering news and stuff around the world. Stacy?
Max, do you know where we are? We are in Sabine Bay and Pensacola Beach, Florida. It doesn't really have anything to do with the topic of our show this episode, but it is sunny.
Yes, the decision was made in the executive level of the Keiser Report to go to where it is sunny and to shoot our show in the sun because we got it like that home staying.
In fact, there is quite a bit of construction going on in the bay. You might hear some sawing or something going on.
That's a new mansion I'm building. It's a 47-bedroom mansion with my Bitcoin profits that are now exceeding the gross national product of some European countries. It'll be dwarfing this entire landscape with a multi-story, multi-pool, multi-chopper enabled, multi-battleship equipped, safe house, vault, mansion, Bitcoin mansion.
I thought you were going to say multi-coin, multi-ICO altcoin.
Well, it won't have any Bitcoin cash. That's the devil's currency.
By the way, I just saw this owl looking over our shoulder. I was a little bit surprised by that. But
I started thinking about potato chips. I don't know why.
as soon as I think of somebody looking over our shoulder,
Yeah.
I have this headline here because I know in the second half you continue your interview with Dan Collins of the China Money Report. And here's the headline: America just can't match China's exploding supercomputer power. If you want to crunch the world's biggest problems, head east. According to a newly published ranking, not only is China home to the world's 2 fastest supercomputers, it also has 202 of the world's fastest 500 such devices, more than any other nation. Meanwhile, America's fastest device limps into 5th place in the charts, and the nation occupies just 144 of the top 500 slots, making it second, according to that metric. So the world's fastest supercomputer is called Taihu Lite, housed at the National Supercomputing Center in Wuxi, China.
This is very important because computing power and speed are the defining characteristics of a superpower. It's not about weapons. It's not about infrastructure so much. It's not about having cultural soft power. It's about having really fast supercomputers. One obvious application is that China will be in a position to dominate the cryptocurrency market, and cryptocurrency market is the de facto 21st century economy and finance and currency. So this is part of the Chinese 21st century program, China 2025. U.S. is now a second-tier country. Donald Trump is helping America ease into being a second-tier country, which is, I think, the most responsible thing he could do.
I'm going to put this into context about how much faster this supercomputer in China is compared to the fastest computer available in the United States. Capable of performing 93 quadrillion calculations per second, Taihu Lite is almost 3 times faster than the second-place Tianhe 2, also in China. The Department of Energy's 5th-place Titan supercomputer, housed at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, performs 17.6 quadrillion calculations per second, making it less than a 5th as fast as Taihu Lite.
Well, I think I'll make this prediction that when you divide a second into quadrillions of parts,
Yeah.
you are bending the space-time continuum in an interesting way. That soon we will, and this is paralleling discoveries in quantum physics as well, and astrology, that, or I should say astronomy.
They could do your horoscope faster than the speed of light.
No, I think that what we're going to see here in the very near future is time travel.
Uh-huh.
Especially when you're uploading your consciousness into virtual reality, and then you won't be able to differentiate between the present, past, and future anyway in a purely digital grid. And so people are going to become immortal. And my other prediction I've made on this show many times is coming true. Humans are dying as a species, giving birth to their digital avatars, just like the God who created humans died, giving birth to the universe that is the mother and father of us humans. So we're at the end and the beginning.
Okay, so here we have this supercomputer situation happening in China. They also have a quantum satellite is the first one. They have a quantum cable that they've laid down between Shanghai and Beijing. So they're like rapidly advancing, spending all their money on infrastructure build and technology and things that will leapfrog them into way ahead of us in the future. Meanwhile, here everything is dilapidated, and maybe our weapon systems are the only thing that's like better, that we spend a lot of money on. But here, the American government is painfully aware that it is now a laggard in the supercomputer space, and a $258 million funding injection into the Department of Energy's exascale computing project is supposed to ready a system capable of performing 1 quintillion operations per second, 10 times the capacity of Tahoe Light by 2021. But China reckons it will achieve the same feat as soon as 2020. Right now, then, China has America's supercomputing industry beat.
This gets back to my theory of the holy dial tone, that the linear concept of time traveling forward is going to be shattered, and we'll be living in a permanent ether, except that the currency will not be Ethereum, because that'll be discredited by the founders' untoward remarks recently, and we will end up purely on Bitcoin.
When Trump was in China, of course, you had those 3 aircraft carriers, the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier battle groups were brought to the Pacific. This is the first time it's been there. They're all there, and they're showing their military might. Well, there's also now calculations coming out about how much all these wars in the Middle East and Asia have cost America basically over the last decade. So the change in warfare from a decade or so ago could scarcely be starker. In the aftermath of 9/11, America's conventional military capability was narrowly focused on a handful of locations, primarily Iraq and Afghanistan. The resources plowed into them were stupendous. $5.6 trillion so far, academics at Brown University estimated this month. That would imply a cost per individual U.S. taxpayer of more than $23,000, including future care for veterans. So again, like, you have contributed $23,000 to this. I have contributed $23,000. Our camera people have contributed $23,000. This is why we're like, in the meantime, we're lagging behind China in the supercomputer space. We're lagging behind them in so many different ways, but we have 3 nuclear-powered aircraft carriers in the Pacific. Ugh.
That same $23,000, if you invested it in Bitcoin in 2011, would now be worth over $50 million. And if you control the supercomputers, and you control crypto, and you control time and space, and you control which way we're going on the algorithmic log scale and to where, you run the world. China is, again, Trump is doing an excellent job. It's like, basically, it's like the Dignitas euthanasia clinic. Trump is the euthanasia doctor. America's being euthanized, and he's doing it in a way where it's the least amount of pain. But that's not cruel. I mean, he's doing, as a good euthanasianist, he's doing things in a cruel-free way.
So again, you know, here we are falling behind rapidly, not only in life expectancy, the increase in mortality rates, infant mortality rates. We're falling way behind all of those, you know, other rich nations, the top 35 nations, as we recently showed. We're spending more and more, not only on this military machine, but wasting human capital, human resources, deploying people around the world to try to maintain this empire. And it's an embarrassing sort of spectacle at this point, as even the U.S. Army War College has recently said that we're fraying at the edges. The empire is definitely fraying at the edges. So at their height, those wars that cost $5.6 trillion so far dominated U.S. military thinking, planning, and workload in a way that is hard to overstate. Working from Pentagon figures, the Brown researchers estimate that some 2.7 million American service personnel passed through those 2 countries in that time, more than half of them deploying more than once. Officially, however, these conflicts were never seen as endless wars. The hope was always that one last surge of troops would win the day and allow a larger withdrawal. So there's always like one more surge, one more surge, one more surge. Here's the super surge. Here's the mega uber super surge. Trump, of course, could offer the best surge ever. This is the best, definitely the best.
The greatest surge ever, Trump surge. These are, next to Trump steaks, Trump surge is my best product ever. Look, I blame Sylvester Stallone because of the Rambo films that attempted to rewrite the Vietnam War and make America the winners. And this was the 80s and Reagan trying to rewrite Vietnam War as if America didn't lose that war. Because if we admit that America lost that war, we would have to ask ourselves, why? And the obvious answer is because the military-industrial complex, as it has been called, decided perpetual war was profitable for them, and they didn't care if they killed 58,000 Americans. They were just grist in the mill. They were just disposable. But instead of coming to grips with that harsh reality, we've said, oh, America has never lost a war, and therefore we're never going to lose a war. Let's just keep sending Americans into the processing plant and get them executed and stick them in, Arlington Cemetery and salute. Thank you for making these contractors rich, you poor putz. When we drive across America, we drive across poor states, poor areas, poor counties, and we see graveyard, 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 populated with dead U.S. servicemen. For why? Because of the Lockheed Martin, Marietta, and et cetera, got rich on these dead Americans. We don't want to admit it.
Well, here, and finally, this last quote here about the actual cost, finally, on what have we actually achieved with all of this. Well, the ever-increasing demand for military resources in a growing number of places is causing increased concern in the U.S. military. In June, a report by the U.S. Army War College described America's military clout as fraying and bluntly concluded that the era of U.S. global military primacy that followed the fall of the Berlin Wall was over. America's armed forces have a variety of strategies to tackle that decline, but the truth is that coming wars will look very different from the sort of military deployments taken for granted in the recent past.
Let's put a link to that underneath the video so people can read that. It's very important. Don't go away. Much more coming away after the break. Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to return to our conversation with Dan Collins of ChinaMoneyReport.com. Dan, welcome back.
Thanks, Max.
I wanted to make a point from the last show, which I failed to make, and that is that Donald Trump, the President of the United States, on his visit to China, he has pivoted away from national security to economic issues. In other words, previous administrations have been focused on national security and how China might or might not be upturning the global geopolitical landscape with various war initiatives. But he's saying, we don't care about that. We just want trade, dude. We want to make peace. We want to make money. How's that playing in China?
I think it's very good. I think compared to the last administration, as you said, the Asian pivot, we announced we're going to move 50% of naval and Air Force assets that are outside the United States into the Asian region with the idea that we're going to create this kind of barrier to stop China from going out. We're going to work with the Philippines. We're going to work with Malaysia. We're going to work with Indonesia and Japan and Korea and try to hem China in. The problem is China's so dominant now economically, you've seen these countries start to fall like dominoes into China's lap. As I mentioned, both the Philippines has already gone over. Korea, we put the THAAD missile system in, and Korean business here in China got hammered. And you're going to see South Korea even start to make better relationships with China and kind of go away from the U.S. You're going to see countries all over Asia do that just out of economic necessity. China is their largest trade partner now, not the United States. We have no form of leverage to keep those relationships outside of a military, which China is also quickly catching up to. So I think focusing on trade and economics and first taking care of the American economy is absolutely the right strategy by the president.
All right, so the China pivot is dead. Now, let me ask you a hypothetical, philosophical question here. Donald Trump seems to be doing the right thing in helping America transition to a new world where they are no longer the big global economic or military superpower, and China is. So is he doing a good job helping America transition to the 21st century in this way, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. We have to get the jobs back. We have to get the tax rates down so companies will stop leaving the United States. You know how China killed us with 0% tax rates. I mean, I've lived here 20 years. They invited all the American multinationals in, 0% tax rates for 3 years. After that, you get another 4 years of 15%. Then after that, you get 25%. So all these multinationals saying, okay, I'll do that with low-cost labor and a skilled workforce, or I can stay in the U.S. and pay out 40% to the federal government, X to the states and local. So basically, we have to get the economy from in terms of a manufacturing base restarted. China makes more steel in 6 weeks than we make all year. So in order to continue, the Soviets learned the hard way, you cannot continue the military machine for that many decades past your economy is a complete failure. For the Soviet Union, it lasted about 50 years. And then finally, the illusion broke down, in the 80s and late 80s and early 90s. The United States is heading in that same direction. We can't make anything for ourselves. We are completely dependent on loans from China and then to print money and to buy goods from China and other countries. So Trump is right. He sees the writing on the wall. We have to get that 100 million people of working age in the United States that don't have a job. We have to get them back in the workforce. We have to get the skills up, and we have to compete real on a real economy basis, and not to compete going forward in the future. As we talked about before, most of American GDP, a lot of it is fake. The health system, 17 to 20% of the GDP. It's because you get overcharged. You get cut your finger chopping an onion, and it's a $3,000 or $4,000 bill for a few stitches. That goes into American GDP. That's all nonsense. Same with the drug prices. So we don't get the real economy restarted, we're never going to be able to maintain the military machine, which also shows signs of a lot of waste and abuse and just general negligence. If you look at some of the recent military contracts that go out, $1 trillion on a fighter jet that nobody likes. These kinds of things.
The idea that America needs to put those 100 million people back to work, and there needs to be a reconciliation of the trade deals, et cetera. We have to keep in mind, though, Dan, that China was coming out of a agricultural society where people were self-subsistence farming in the countryside and living on $1 a day. Remember China was in the third world. People were living on $2 a day. So my point is that if America is going to try to get back in the race here, then Americans are going to have to sacrifice. They're going to have to pull up their bootstraps and say, we need to understand that if we're going to pay down these debts and avoid being taken over by China, we're going to have to start living on, make do on $3,000 or $4,000 a year per family. Otherwise, just cede to reality and give in to your new Chinese overlords. I don't think America's not going to make this. It's not going to make it happen, Dan. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there's big changes coming. I think once the dollar finally gets the great reckoning, all of that imported product is going to skyrocket in price. You're going to see a lot of inflation. People will be living on $30,000 to $40,000 to $50,000 a year, except it'll feel like $3,000 to $4,000 a year. So that's definitely in the cards. But you look at the workforce culturally now, America's slipped so far down the ladder. The opioid crisis is the divorce rates. You basically look at any social statistic. Some of the biggest IPOs in China that have launched this year have to do with home tutoring, home education. You have 3-year-olds here that read and write better English than American 3-year-olds. I see their textbook. It's insane. They learn English here at the same time they learn Chinese now. So there's just such a cultural, as you said, and you're totally right, Max. China was starving to death in the 1960s. That's how it's been an absolute, complete 360-degree change. But they remember those days. The guys in the 50s here remember not having money, not being able to do anything, being, and have basically no life. And, I've been here 20 years myself. It's been, the change I've seen is just hard to explain. But so there's economically you can see we're shifting axis here and U.S. is going to have a big changes coming in the future, I think.
So again, to your point about this dollar and the role the dollar plays, and it's once the dollar reflects the reality of the global economy and purchasing power for Americans is crushed, and as you point out, it'll be like living on $4,000 or $5,000 a year in present dollars. If gas is now $12 a gallon, $15 a gallon, food is doubled or tripled in price because all the support from the dollar's been removed. And I mean, let's talk about the One Belt, One Road, policy, which is becoming huge as an alternative to the U.S. dollar-based global economy. Dan, talk a little bit about that.
Well, this is what America used to do. We used to go in and build infrastructure, right? Bridges, power plants. This is what China's doing in Central Asia. They've already got rail lines connecting directly from China to Europe. But this is about growing the economies in their neighborhood, so to speak. All the way from the west, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, all the way to Europe. The One Belt, One Road ends in places like Serbia. You see Eastern Europe now. China has a lot of influence. In places like Serbia where they get promised to come into the EU, they get promised all this and that, but actually nothing happened. And now China's coming in. Yeah, Greece will build your port and restructure. We'll buy your port and restructure it. Serbia, we're going to build high-speed rail line for you from Belgrade to Budapest. So this One Belt, One Road is introducing the RMB. It's going to introduce Chinese technology, which is really quite good now. High-speed rail in China. They have more high-speed rail line than the rest of the world combined. And they went from 0 to that in like 6 years. Imagine the United States trying to do that. So this is the type of, forget even trying to catch up at this point.
Yeah, Dan, you mentioned Greece. Very interesting situation there because Greece was allowed to die vis-a-vis the Troika, the ECB, the EU, and the IMF. And we now know that John Paulson, a hedge fund in New York, along with insiders in the Greek government, were hedging and playing games in the credit default swap market. They made billions of dollars on Greece's destruction. And the government in Greece, it looks like they were totally complicit in their destruction for a few pennies. Then we had, Russia offered to step in and restore order, some economic lifeline, essentially, to Greece. We know that from the records. Didn't go anywhere, according to Yanis Varoufakis, who's talked to me about this, that Russia offered a lifeline. And then you're saying China, so what's the status? Because the Greek economy is still moribund. It's still completely toast. What's the status there? Is China offering a lifeline to Greece? What's going on there, Dan? You've opened a Pandora's box. Tell us more.
Well, I know more on the projects they're working on in Eastern Europe, not so much on Greece. I do know the port they bought in Greece. The throughput on that port is up 200-300%, and it's doing very well. And it's managed by the Chinese shipping, the port company here, and they've got their people over there. So they've restructured it and it's working well. In terms of Eastern Europe is the big play. China has had particular meetings, getting everyone together from Poland through Serbia, Czech Republic, everybody trying to build out infrastructure, whether it's electric, whether it's high-speed rail. And eventually you'll see factories moving there. I mean, people in Serbia now, for instance, give you an example, make half of what a Chinese worker would make. This is the world we live in now. I mean, we've totally flipped. So yeah, I mean, you're going to see a lot more Chinese power projection all over the world. East Europe, definitely Central Asia, and all through the Philippines and Southeast Asia. And you'll see that, and it's going to be through the economy. People want business, they want better livelihoods. They don't need, look at Africa. China builds the schools, the hospitals, the bridges. They're putting in plants in Eastern Europe, and we bring drone bases. I mean, so which one? Where do you get more benefit?
What are the risks for China that could derail what's happening there? Obviously, people talk about a housing bubble. That could be a problem. But is that a problem or not? And are there any potential, that you see risks that could pop up? And what's that look like, Dan?
There's always risks. Since I've been coming on your show, Max, probably 6-7 years now. China's GDP's double. The China bears have been talking about a collapse since 2001. Guys like Gordon Chang wrote a book on it. It was really a childish book. I mean, it was nonsense. China does have risks. They know that. They address that. They have local government debt issues, which they're trying to work through. A lot of these One Belt, One Road projects, we're going to have to see if it turns out to really, you're going to need the economies to become better to actually have those pay off. So China's putting a lot on the line as they go global, but they have to watch their debt. But in terms of, overall, in terms of, their debt levels aren't so high yet. In terms, nationally, they have huge FX reserves. So I would just watch the economies, but they've been through much worse than they're through, than before. So I think there's risk, but I would say it's probably 10 years away.
Well, during the 19th century, a lot of Chinese folks helped America build its railway system. Maybe it's time for Americans to ship off to China and help them build their railway system. Dan Collins, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thanks, Max.
All right, that's going to do it for this edition of the Keiser Report with me, Max Keiser, and Stacy Herbert. I'd like to thank our guest, Dan Collins. He's a must-read guy at thechinamoneyreport.com. You can reach us on Twitter at Keiser Report. Until next time, bye, y'all.